The girl who fell from the stars. The battlefield was silent now, except for the crackling of small fires and the distant hum of enemy drones scanning the ruins. Smoke rose from the broken city, turning the sky into a dark, endless void. Commander Ryland moved carefully through the debris, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. His mission was simple: search for survivors and eliminate any remaining threats. But as he stepped over the rubble of a collapsed building, he heard something unexpected. A small, weak sound. It wasn't the sound of a soldier calling for help. It wasn't the groan of a dying enemy. It was softer, a whimper. Ryland froze, his heart pounding. He turned his head, scanning the shadows. The sound came again, barely a whisper against the wind. Slowly, he stepped forward, his boots crunching over shattered glass and broken metal. Then, beneath a fallen steel beam, he saw her. A small alien girl. She was barely breathing, her body covered in deep wounds and burns. Her strange golden eyes flickered open for a second, locking onto him before shutting again. Her chest rose and fell weakly, her pale, silver-blue skin covered in dirt and dried blood. She was from the enemy race, the Silari. For years, humans and Silari had been at war. The Silari were fast, intelligent, and ruthless. They had destroyed entire colonies, wiped out human fleets, and killed thousands without mercy. She shouldn't be alive. Ryland's fingers tightened around his rifle. He had been trained for this. The rule was clear: no enemy left alive. If he reported her location, a drone would finish the job. But he didn't move. He could see how small she was, barely a child. Too young to be a soldier, too weak to be a threat. The deep wound on her side was bleeding badly, and from the way her arm was twisted, it was probably broken. She wouldn't survive much longer. Ryland clenched his jaw. She was the enemy. Helping her was a mistake, but something inside him, the part of him that still remembered what it meant to be human, refused to walk away. He sighed, lowering his rifle. "This is a bad idea," he muttered to himself. He knelt beside her, carefully pushing the rubble off her body. She flinched, her breathing quickening in panic. Her lips parted slightly, as if trying to speak, but no words came out. "Easy," Ryland said, his voice calm. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't understand his words, but something in his tone made her stop struggling. She was too weak to fight anyway. Ryland pulled out a small medkit from his belt. His hands moved fast, applying a field bandage to her wounds. He didn't have much time. If enemy patrols found him here, they would kill them both. As he worked, he kept an ear on his comms. The human army was withdrawing, leaving this area behind. No backup was coming. If he wanted to save her, he was on his own. When he was done, he carefully lifted the girl into his arms. She barely reacted, her head resting weakly against his chest. She had lost too much blood. He turned and started moving, keeping low, heading toward an old, abandoned bunker. But just as he reached the entrance, his helmet's warning system blared. Danger detected. Enemy drones approaching. Ryland's breath caught. He turned his head sharply and saw 3 metallic shapes in the sky, scanning the ruins, searching for life. If they saw him carrying the Xelari, they wouldn't ask questions. They would open fire. His grip on the girl tightened. He had 2 choices: drop her and run, or risk everything to keep her alive. The choice should have been easy. But he had already made up his mind. With a deep breath, Ryland ran, hunted by the enemy. Ryland's boots hit the ground hard as he sprinted through the ruined streets, his arms wrapped tightly around the unconscious alien girl. The weight of her fragile body barely slowed him down, but the real threat was above, 3 enemy drones scanning for survivors. He needed to disappear, fast. The drones hovered low, their red scanning lights sweeping across the wreckage. Ryland's breath came in short bursts as he dodged behind a collapsed building, pressing his back against the cold, cracked wall. The girl in his arms stirred slightly but remained unconscious. Good. If she made a sound, they were dead. The drones shifted their search pattern, moving in a slow circle. Rylan knew how they worked. They detected heat signatures, movement, and biometric readings. His suit was designed to mask human thermal signatures, but the girl wasn't wearing any kind of stealth gear. She was still radiating body heat. One wrong move, and they were finished. He scanned his surroundings. An old sewer entrance lay ahead, half buried under rubble. His best chance to escape. But reaching it would mean exposing himself for at least 5 seconds. 5 seconds in the open, under the watchful eyes of the enemy. Rylan exhaled, shifting his grip on the girl. 5 seconds. That's all he needed. The drones moved slightly to the left, their scanners passing over a pile of burning debris. Now, Rylan launched himself forward, sprinting toward the sewer entrance. His legs burned, his heart hammered in his chest. 3 seconds. The drones hesitated, detecting movement. 2 seconds. A sharp beep echoed from above. They had locked onto him. 1 second. Rylan dropped down, sliding the last few feet and disappearing into the darkness of the sewer. The moment he hit the ground, he twisted and pressed his body flat against the damp wall, holding the girl close. He stayed completely still, listening. The drones hovered above the entrance. A mechanical voice rang out in an alien language, cold and emotionless. Then, silence. Rylan didn't move for a full minute. His pulse pounded in his ears. When he finally risked looking up, the red lights were gone. They hadn't followed. He let out a slow breath. They were safe. For now. A fragile trust. The air in the sewer was thick and damp, carrying the scent of rust and decay. Rylan adjusted his grip on the girl and moved deeper inside, his boots splashing lightly in the shallow water. After a few minutes, he found an abandoned maintenance room. The door was half broken, but it would do. They needed a place to rest. Rylan set the girl down carefully on an old metal table. Her silver-blue skin looked even paler now, her breathing shallow. He checked her wounds. The bleeding had stopped, but she had a fever. "Great," Rylan muttered, running a hand through his short, sweat-drenched hair. "You're not making this easy, kid." She flinched at the sound of his voice, her eyes fluttering open. Rylan froze. For the first time, she looked at him, really looked at him. Her golden eyes were clouded with pain and fear. She tried to move, but the moment she did, she gasped in agony. Rylan held up a hand. "Easy, you're hurt." She didn't understand his words. He could see it in her expression. Confusion, fear, and exhaustion. Then, suddenly, she panicked. With surprising speed, she pushed herself backward, nearly falling off the table. Rylan barely caught her in time, gripping her shoulders firmly but gently. "Stop," he said. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She trembled under his touch. She didn't believe him. Rylan sighed. Of course she didn't. Why would she? To her, he was a human soldier, the enemy. She had probably seen people like him kill her kind. Maybe she had lost her family to human weapons. Maybe she thought he was just keeping her alive to interrogate her. He couldn't change that. Not yet. So, instead of speaking, Rylan slowly reached into his bag and pulled out a water canteen. He held it out to her. She stared at it, wary. Her hands were shaking. "It's just water," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Drink." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, hesitantly, she took the canteen from his hands. She sniffed it first, as if expecting poison. Then, finally, she drank. Rylan exhaled, relieved. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A new problem. After a few minutes, the girl's breathing slowed, her body relaxing slightly. She was still watching him, but the fear in her eyes had lessened. Rylan took the opportunity to check his comms. He switched to a secure frequency and sent a quick coded message to Dr. Lin, an old friend from his days in the military. "Need medical assistance. Location compromised. Enemy searching. The response came almost instantly. Understood. Sending coordinates. You have 6 hours. 6 hours. Rylan clenched his jaw. That wasn't much time. He glanced at the girl. She was awake, watching him cautiously. He could tell she was still in pain, but at least she was stable. That was when he heard it. A distant sound. Metal scraping against stone. Rylan tensed, his hand going to his weapon. The girl's ears twitched, sensing the danger too. Someone, or something, was in the sewers with them, and it was getting closer. The escape through the ruins. Rylan's grip tightened on his weapon as the sound of metal scraping against stone echoed through the dark sewer tunnel. It wasn't the humming of drones or the distant footsteps of a patrol. This was something closer, something hunting them. The alien girl stiffened beside him, her golden eyes wide with fear. She didn't understand his words, but she understood danger. They had to move. Now. Rylan reached for his pack and slung it over his shoulder. He grabbed the girl's arm carefully, making sure not to hurt her injured side. "Come on," he whispered. "We need to go." She hesitated for just a second before nodding weakly. Together, they slipped into the darkness of the tunnels, moving as fast as her injuries would allow. Something in the dark. The sewer tunnels stretched for miles beneath the ruins of the city. Rylan had studied maps of this place before the war, but that was years ago. Now, the pathways were flooded, collapsed, or overgrown with alien plant life. They didn't have time to figure out the best route. A low growl echoed from behind them. Rylan's heart pounded. That wasn't human. He stole a glance back, but saw nothing except shadows. His mind raced through possibilities. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a patrol. That meant it had to be either a wild creature that had taken shelter underground, or something that Xilari left behind. The girl flinched as the growl came again, closer this time. Rylan grabbed his flashlight and switched it on for a brief second. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a twisted metal pipe, some broken walls, and eyes. Rylan barely had time to react before the creature lunged. He shoved the girl to the side and fired. The tunnel lit up as bullets tore through the air, slamming into the monstrous shape leaping toward them. It was fast. Rylan barely managed to roll out of the way as sharp claws scraped against the stone floor where he had been standing just a second ago. He caught a glimpse of the thing, a nightmare of metal and flesh. It had the rough, patchy skin of a predator, but parts of its body gleamed with cybernetic enhancements. Half organic, half machine. A war beast. Rylan had seen them before, used by the Xilari to track and kill enemy soldiers in the field. The creatures had been engineered to survive in any environment. Deserts, frozen wastelands, even the ruins of a city. And now, one was hunting them. The war beast let out a guttural snarl and lunged again. Rylan fired, hitting its shoulder, but the bullets barely slowed it down. It moved with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through pipes and concrete as it charged. The girl gasped, stumbling backward. They wouldn't outrun this thing. Rylan made a split-second decision. He grabbed a flash grenade from his belt and threw it. The explosion of light and sound filled the tunnel, making the war beast screech in pain. It stumbled back, its sensors overloaded. "Move!" Rylan grabbed the girl and ran. The creature roared behind them, its claws scraping against the walls, but it was still recovering. That bought them a few seconds. They took a sharp turn, running down a narrow passage. Rylan could feel his lungs burning, his muscles aching. But he didn't stop. Up ahead, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. A bridge stretched across a deep ravine, with old metal support beams hanging from the ceiling like broken ribs. Water dripped from the cracks above, and the air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. But the most important thing, there was a way out. On the other side of the bridge, a ladder led up toward a collapsed building. If they could reach it, they could climb out of the tunnels and into the ruins above. But then the growl came again. Raylan turned, and his stomach dropped. The war beast had recovered, and it wasn't alone. Two more of the creatures slithered out from the darkness, their mechanical eyes glowing red in the shadows. Raylan gritted his teeth. No time to think. No time to run. The bridge of no return. Raylan shoved the girl forward. Go. Climb the ladder. She hesitated for just a second before obeying, stumbling toward the bridge. The war beasts circled, blocking every escape except the bridge itself. Raylan knew what he had to do. He pulled out the last detonation charge from his belt and primed it. If they made it to the other side, he could blow the bridge. Come on, he muttered under his breath, backing onto the creaking metal surface. The war beasts followed, their claws clanking against the steel. He glanced over his shoulder. The girl was halfway up the ladder, almost there. But the creatures were too close. Raylan took a deep breath, then charged forward. He met the first war beast head-on, slamming the butt of his rifle into its face before dodging a swipe of its claws. The second beast lunged, but Raylan ducked and kicked it hard, sending it skidding across the metal floor. They weren't used to someone fighting back. But Raylan wasn't trying to win. He was buying time. The girl reached the top. She turned, her golden eyes wide with panic. Raylan gave her a quick nod. Then he hit the detonator. Boom! The entire bridge shook violently as the charges exploded. Metal screamed as support beams snapped, and the war beasts let out ear-piercing screeches as the floor beneath them gave way. Raylan jumped, barely catching the edge of the ladder. His fingers slipped. His body dangled over the abyss. Then, a hand grabbed his wrist. For a moment, he thought it was another enemy. But then he looked up. It was her. The alien girl, still weak, still injured, was holding on to him with all the strength she had left. For the first time, she made a choice. She could have let him fall. He was a human, after all. The enemy. But she didn't. She pulled him up. Together, they collapsed onto the ground as the bridge collapsed into the abyss below. The war beasts were gone. The path forward was clear. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just lay there, breathing hard. Then, slowly, the girl looked at him. Her golden eyes filled with something new. Trust. Raylan gave her a tired smile. Not bad, kid. She didn't understand his words. But this time, she understood the meaning. A secret revealed. Raylan and the alien girl sat in the ruins of a collapsed building, catching their breath. The destroyed bridge lay far below, where the war beasts had vanished into the abyss. Smoke still curled from the wreckage, but the only sounds now were their own ragged breathing. For the first time since he found her, the girl wasn't afraid of him. Her golden eyes flickered in the dim light, studying him with something new. Trust. Raylan knew they couldn't stay here long. The explosion would attract attention, and he was already low on ammo. He turned on his comms, switching to a secure frequency. Dr. Lind, do you copy? A moment of silence. Then, a familiar voice crackled through his earpiece. Raylan, you're still alive. Barely, Raylan muttered. I need a safe house. I've got a situation. There was a pause. How bad? Raylan glanced at the alien girl, who was still watching him. Complicated. Lynn sighed, sending coordinates. You'll have to move fast. There's chatter about a high-priority target in your sector. Raylan frowned. High priority. You tell me. Whatever you found, someone wants it dead. Raylan's gut twisted. They were being hunted. He shut off his comms and stood, adjusting the strap of his rifle. We need to go. The girl hesitated before nodding. It was the first time she had followed him without fear. A dead city and unspoken words. The ruins stretched before them like the skeleton of a fallen god. Shattered skyscrapers, burned-out vehicles, and streets filled with rubble. The war had left nothing untouched. Raylan led the way, keeping low, scanning every shadow. Drones were still in the area, but they were searching for something specific, or someone. The girl moved silently beside him. Despite her injuries, she didn't slow them down. She was sci-fi, built for survival. But even she looked weary. After an hour, they reached the rendezvous point. It was an old safe house, hidden beneath the wreckage of a transport station. A secret bunker, long abandoned. Rylan punched in a code, and the heavy doors slid open with a low hiss. Inside, the air was stale, but it was safe. He led the girl inside and sealed the entrance behind them. For now, they had a moment to breathe. First words. The bunker had supplies: water, food, medical kits. Rylan tossed a protein bar to the girl. She caught it but just stared at it, confused. "It's food," he said. "You eat it." She frowned. Then, carefully, she mimicked his movement, breaking off a small piece and chewing slowly. Rylan watched, impressed. She was learning. After a long silence, she looked up at him and, for the first time, spoke a single word. "Rylan." His breath caught. He hadn't told her his name, but she had been listening. She was trying. Rylan nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The girl hesitated, then pointed to herself. "Aya." Rylan blinked. "That's your name." She nodded. "Aya." He repeated, testing the sound. It was soft, unfamiliar, but it suited her. The smallest hint of a smile flickered on her lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The truth about the war. Hours passed. Rylan checked his gear while Aya rested. They still had 4 hours before they had to move, but something wasn't sitting right with him. Why were the drones hunting her? Why was she so important? Rylan had fought in this war for years. He knew the Xilari were dangerous. But she was just a kid. What kind of threat could she be? He turned to his comms. "Lynn, what do you know about high-priority Xilari targets?" There was a long silence. Then, "Rylan, what did you find?" Rylan frowned. "A kid. She's wounded, but they're hunting her like she's the biggest threat in the sector." Lynn cursed. "You need to get out. Now." "That bad?" Lynn hesitated. "Worse." Rylan felt a cold weight settle in his gut. "Tell me." Lynn exhaled. "The Xilari were never fighting to conquer us." "That's the lie the war was built on." Rylan stiffened. "What are you talking about?" Lynn's voice was urgent. "They weren't invading us. They were running from something else." Rylan's mind reeled. Running. From what? Then Lynn said the words that changed everything. "Aya isn't just a child. She's the last survivor of the royal bloodline. The Xilari aren't the real enemy. The thing that destroyed their homeworld is coming for us next." Rylan's pulse thundered in his ears. Aya wasn't just some random survivor. She was the key to stopping something far worse. And now, everyone, human and alien alike, wanted her dead. Rylan turned to Aya, who was watching him with silent understanding. She knew. She had known all along. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the bunker walls. They had found them. The betrayal. The moment Rylan heard the approaching footsteps outside the bunker, he knew they were out of time. Aya, the last surviving heir of the Xilari, the girl he had fought to protect, was no longer just an injured child. She was the key to everything. And now both sides, human and alien, wanted her dead. Rylan reached for his rifle and scanned the bunker's entry panel. It was still locked, but it wouldn't hold against a full assault. His mind raced. Who had found them first? Enemy forces, human soldiers, something worse. Aya sat silently on the metal bench, her golden eyes calm, but there was something else there now. Resignation. She had always known this moment would come, and she didn't expect to survive it. Rylan clenched his jaw. Not happening. With a silent signal, he motioned for her to move behind cover. Aya hesitated before obeying, slipping behind a storage crate. Then, the doors exploded inward. The last chance for loyalty. A group of human soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Rylan instantly recognized the uniforms. Special forces. These weren't just any soldiers. They were his people. And at the front of them was Major Darian Voss. The moment Rylan saw him, his stomach twisted. Voss wasn't just another officer. He was Rylan's former commanding officer. And now, he was here, hunting them. "Commander Rylan," Voss said coolly, stepping forward. "I'll give you one chance to stand down." Rylan's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't raise it. "Not yet." "What's the mission, Major?" Voss sighed. "You already know." Rylan's jaw clenched. "She's a kid, Darian." "She's a threat," Voss countered. "And you're harboring her." "She's the last of her kind," Rylan shot back. "And if she dies, so does our only chance at ending this war." Voss tilted his head. "Or stopping something worse." Rylan didn't answer. Voss sighed, lowering his weapon slightly. "You were one of my best soldiers, Rylan, but you've lost your way. I know you believe you're doing the right thing, but orders are orders." Rylan knew what was coming next. "Hand over the auxiliary girl," Voss continued, "and I'll make sure you live to fight another day." Aya peered out from behind the crate, her golden eyes flicking between Rylan and Voss. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. Rylan had a choice, and he was running out of time. The choice that changed everything. Rylan's heart pounded. He had spent years fighting for the human side, obeying orders, doing what was necessary. But this was different. Aya wasn't the enemy. She was a survivor, a child, a symbol of something bigger than both sides. And if Rylan handed her over, she wouldn't live past the next hour. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "I can't do that." Voss's expression didn't change. He had expected this. He had known Rylan too long. "That's disappointing," he said, "but not surprising." Then he gave the order. "Take him down." Everything happened in a flash. Rylan dove for cover, rolling behind a steel crate as bullets tore through the air. Sparks flew as gunfire struck the bunker walls. Aya let out a startled cry but stayed hidden. Rylan had fought alongside these men before. He knew their tactics, their training. But now, they were trying to kill him. He took a deep breath. No time for second-guessing. Rylan popped up and fired, his shots precise. 2 soldiers dropped instantly. The others scattered, taking cover. Voss didn't flinch. He simply raised his own weapon and fired. Rylan barely ducked in time, a bullet grazing the metal crate behind him. He needed a plan. He couldn't win a direct fight, not against an elite squad. His only option was escape. He turned to Aya. "Run when I say, got it?" She stared at him for a second, then nodded. Rylan pulled a smoke grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and tossed it toward the entrance. A thick cloud of gray filled the air. "Now." Rylan grabbed Aya's arm and bolted toward the emergency exit. Gunfire followed them, bullets slicing through the smoke, but they kept running. They reached the exit hatch, only to find it was locked from the outside. Rylan cursed. No time. He pulled out his last explosive charge, slapped it onto the metal door, and hit the detonator. Boom! The door shattered outward, and fresh air flooded in. Rylan pushed Aya forward. "Go." She scrambled through, and he followed. They emerged into the ruins of the city. The night sky stretched above them, the distant glow of enemy patrols moving like ghosts through the buildings. They were free. For now. Hunted on both sides. Rylan didn't stop running. He didn't look back. Voss wouldn't give up that easily. They would be hunted now, not just by the auxiliary, but by their own people. Aya clung to his arm, struggling to keep up, but she didn't complain. She didn't ask why he had risked everything for her. She already knew the answer. They ran for miles, ducking into the shadows, avoiding patrols. Every step brought them closer to the coordinates Dr. Lin had sent. But Rylan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Aya wasn't just a lost child. She wasn't just the heir to a dying race. She was humanity's last hope. And now, Rylan wasn't just a soldier. He was a traitor. The final battle. The city was burning. Rylan and Aya sprinted through the ruins, their breaths coming fast and hard. Behind them, the sounds of war echoed. Distant explosions, gunfire, and the eerie hum of drones scanning for their heat signatures. The sky was thick with smoke, the remnants of aerial bombings painting the night in fiery orange hues. Aya stumbled, exhaustion weighing on her small frame. Rylan grabbed her wrist, steadying her. "We're almost there," he muttered. But he wasn't sure if that was true. For hours, they had been running, hunted by both humans and Silari alike. Their own kind had betrayed them. There was no safe place left. The only chance they had left was Dr. Lin. And her message had been clear. Get to the extraction point. Whatever happens, don't let them take the girl. Rylan wasn't planning to. But first, they had to survive. No way out. They reached the edge of a broken overpass. Below, the streets were filled with enemy patrols, human soldiers in black armor, moving like shadows between the ruins. Their rifles glowed with high-energy rounds, scanning for any sign of movement. Rylan's gut twisted. Voss had sent everything after them. Aya's grip tightened on his sleeve. Her golden eyes were wide with fear. She didn't need to speak. She knew they were trapped. Rylan scanned the area. The extraction point was still half a mile away, but there was no way through. Unless... His gaze fell on a half-collapsed sky bridge, stretching across the city's rooftops. If they could climb it, they could stay above the patrols and make it across undetected. But there was a problem. The structure was barely standing. One wrong step, and it would crumble. Rylan looked at Aya. She was still weak, still injured, but she trusted him. That was enough. He pulled her toward the bridge. "Come on." Aya hesitated, then nodded. They climbed. The ambush. They made it halfway across before Rylan's instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. Aya sensed it too. She stopped suddenly, her body stiffening. Rylan turned, and the sky exploded with light. Gunfire. Sniper rounds ripped through the air, shattering the glass beneath their feet. Rylan grabbed Aya, rolling behind a support beam as bullets tore through the bridge. Voss had planned this. The patrols below were a distraction. The real attack was waiting for them. A voice crackled through a nearby speaker. "You're out of time, Rylan." Voss. Rylan gritted his teeth. He peered over the edge, spotting 3 heavily armored soldiers with energy rifles trained on their position. Aya clutched his sleeve, her breathing fast. They couldn't outrun snipers. They couldn't hide. There was only one option left. They had to fight. Rylan exhaled. "Stay behind me." Aya nodded. Then he moved. Against impossible odds. Rylan fired first. His bullets tore through the silence, forcing the snipers to scatter. He sprinted forward, using the broken steel beams as cover, zigzagging between shots. Aya stayed low, her small form nearly invisible in the chaos. A sniper fired. A blast of energy barely missed Rylan's head. He dove, rolled, and fired back, hitting one of the soldiers in the chest. The sniper collapsed. 2 left. Aya suddenly gasped. Rylan turned to see one of the soldiers aiming at her. No. Rylan threw himself in front of her, raising his rifle just as the sniper fired. The shot hit him. Pain exploded through his side. Rylan staggered but stayed on his feet, gritting his teeth as blood soaked through his uniform. Aya cried out in panic, but Rylan forced himself to keep going. He raised his weapon and fired again. The second sniper dropped. 1 left. But the last soldier wasn't just any sniper. It was Voss. And he wasn't holding a rifle anymore. He had a knife. The duel. Voss stepped forward, the city burning behind him. "You should have stayed down, Rylan," he said coldly. Rylan, still bleeding, tightened his grip on his rifle. "Yeah, and let you kill a kid." "She's not a kid," Voss growled. "She's the last of them. If she lives, we lose everything." Rylan's vision blurred from blood loss, but he kept his stance. "Then I guess we're already lost." Voss lunged. Rylan barely dodged the first strike. The knife sliced across his shoulder, but he countered, slamming the butt of his rifle into Voss's ribs. Voss grunted but didn't stop. He punched Rylan hard, knocking him backward. Rylan hit the ground hard, his vision spinning. Aya screamed. Voss grabbed her. She thrashed, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. Rylan's chest heaved. His limbs were heavy. His body was shutting down. But he wasn't done yet. With the last of his strength, he reached for his pistol and fired. The bullet struck Voss in the chest. For a moment, he just stood there. Then, slowly, he released Aya. His body crumpled to the ground. Voss's breath came in shallow gasps. He looked at Rylan, his expression unreadable. Then finally he muttered, "You chose wrong." And then he was gone. A new future. Rylan collapsed. The pain was unbearable now, but they had won. Aya knelt beside him, her golden eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not grief. Hope. The sound of engines filled the air. Dr. Lin's dropship descended from the clouds, its doors already opening. They had made it. Aya turned back to Rylan, her small hands pressing against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. She whispered something in her own language, words Rylan didn't understand. But he understood the meaning. She wasn't ready to lose him. Neither was he. With the last of his strength, he whispered, "We're not done yet, kid." Aya smiled. And together, they rose, toward whatever future awaited them. A second chance. The world blurred around Rylan as the dropship lifted off, its engines roaring against the burning city below. His body ached, his vision swam, and the pain in his side was a constant fire. But he held on. He had to. Aya sat beside him, gripping his hand, her small fingers pressing into his torn gloves. Her golden eyes flickered with fear, watching as the wound in his side continued to bleed. Rylan managed a weak smile. "You look worried." Aya didn't understand the words, but she understood him. She tightened her grip. The ship jolted as it ascended through the smoke-filled sky, the ruined city falling away beneath them. Voss was dead. The enemy patrols were scattered. But they weren't safe yet. Ahead of them, the real battle was just beginning. The arrival. Rylan barely noticed as the ship entered the hidden resistance base. The moment they landed, Dr. Lin's med team rushed in, pulling him onto a stretcher. Aya tried to follow, but the soldiers blocked her path. She panicked. Her small frame tensed, her hands clenched into fists, her breathing quick and sharp. Rylan, fighting against the pull of unconsciousness, lifted his head. "Aya," he murmured. She turned and ran past the soldiers, grabbing his arm before they could stop her. The medical team hesitated. Lin, standing nearby, studied the child with curious eyes. "She won't let go," one of the medics muttered. Lin exhaled. "Then bring her along." They carried Rylan inside. Aya never let go. Between life and death. Rylan drifted in and out of darkness. Pain. Voices. Bright lights. He felt the sting of surgical needles, the burn of medication flooding his veins. He heard Aya's voice, small and worried, speaking words he couldn't understand. Then, nothing. Time lost meaning. The truth revealed. When Rylan finally opened his eyes, it was to the soft glow of a medical bay. The sterile scent of antiseptics filled the air, and the rhythmic beeping of machines echoed through the quiet room. His body felt heavy, but no longer broken. His wounds were sealed, his strength slowly returning. Then he saw her. Aya sat curled up in the chair beside him, fast asleep. She had never left his side. Dr. Lin stood in the doorway, watching. You made it, Lin said quietly. Rylan exhaled. For now. Lin stepped forward, glancing at Aya. She wouldn't let anyone near you. She didn't eat, barely slept. Rylan looked at her small, sleeping form. Something in his chest tightened. She's strong, he murmured. Lin nodded. And important. The doctor hesitated before continuing. We decrypted the auxiliary transmissions. We know why they were hunting her. Rylan tensed. Tell me. Lin sighed. She's not just a royal heir. She's the last living carrier of something ancient, a genetic key. The auxiliary weren't just fleeing from a war. They were fleeing from something coming. Rylan frowned. Coming where? Lin met his gaze. Here. The coming war. Aya stirred, blinking awake. She rubbed her eyes sleepily before looking at Rylan. When she saw that he was awake, she sat up straight, her golden eyes bright. Rylan smiled. Morning, kid. Aya tilted her head, trying to understand. Rylan tapped his chest. Rylan. Aya hesitated, then tapped his hand. Rylan. He nodded, then tapped her shoulder. She smiled. Aya. Lin watched the exchange with quiet interest. She trusts you more than anyone, Lin said. That's good, because she's the key to stopping what's coming. Rylan's brow furrowed. Which is? Lin exhaled. We're not sure yet, but whatever wiped out the auxiliary homeworld, it's not done. And humanity is next. Rylan let out a slow breath. Of course it is. Lin smiled wryly. You always had great luck. Rylan glanced at Aya. What do we do now? Lin's expression hardened. We prepare. A new purpose. Over the next few weeks, Rylan recovered. Aya stayed close to him, learning human words, watching everything, absorbing the world around her. The other refugees, soldiers, rebels, survivors, treated her with caution, fear, and curiosity. She was different, an alien, an enemy. But Rylan saw something else. He saw hope. One night, as he sat outside watching the stars, Aya sat beside him. She pointed up at the sky, her small hand tracing a distant star. Home, she whispered. Rylan's chest tightened. Not anymore. Aya lowered her hand. Her golden eyes flickered with something deep, something older than her years. New home? She asked. Rylan smiled, ruffling her silver blue hair. Yeah, kid. We'll find one. She nodded. Then, after a moment, she placed her small hand in his. Rylan squeezed her fingers lightly. She wasn't just some lost child anymore. She was his responsibility, his family, and together they were going to fight for the future. The legend begins. Days later, Rylan stood in front of a war table, staring at the tactical maps. The coming war was real, and humanity wasn't ready. Lin approached him. The council wants to see you. Rylan smirked. Let me guess. They want to know why I risked my life for an enemy child. Lin nodded. Rylan exhaled, glancing over at Aya. She stood near the window, staring up at the sky, small but unbreakable. He knew what he had to do. I'll talk to them, Rylan said. But they're not going to like what I have to say. Lin raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Rylan picked up his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder. That this war isn't about humanity versus aliens anymore. He turned toward Aya, who met his gaze without fear. It's about survival. Aya walked over, taking his hand. And together, they stepped into the future. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, they had a chance. A second chance.